Good morning. It is March 30th, Tuesday. I don't know how we got to this place already, but we're on the cusp of April. I want to welcome you all to today's meeting of the Joint Legislative Management Committee. We're going to start today with a presentation from the Joint Fiscal Office. We'll be hearing from Steve Klein and Catherine Benham with an update and a request on two positions in the Joint Fiscal Office. After that, we'll be hearing from Chief Matt Romei about a proposed body camera policy, following up on a budgetary request from last year. So I think the Joint Fiscal Office presentation will be about 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Benham.
Well, good morning. I'm Catherine Benham with the Joint Fiscal Office, and I have a memo that's on the committee page, but I can also share it. What would you all prefer?
I think for transparency's sake, if you could share it, I think that would be great, Catherine, and we can look at it together and then certainly remove it from the screen so that people can ask questions.
Sure. So I'm here today to talk to you about two, sort of update you on one position and then talk about another position. And this memo, is this large enough for you to read, or should I?
It is not large enough for me, so I would love it just a little bit bigger.
Okay.
That looks great. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I just start off with this memo with the statutory oversight. So the Joint Legislative Management Committee shall request for new permanent positions in staff offices as appropriate for inclusion in the proposed legislative branch budget. So that is the text for this discussion today. I want to lead off by saying we have two positions we're going to discuss, and it's, as you all know, for you all, life has been challenging in the pandemic, and we've had ongoing, we are all dealing with challenges. So if these positions go forward, we will deal with the funding in the Senate as we move forward. First, let me start with the information technology project review capacity. I think some of you have met Dan Smith. He is a consultant to the legislature. He reviews IT projects. He started 6 years ago. It was funded through the Capitol bill because there were some very large information technology projects that were coming through, and the legislature felt like it didn't have the resources to figure out if those projects were going well or not. And so we went through a process and we hired Dan Smith. His current contract, 2-year contracts, his current contract ends in August. And unfortunately for us, he is retiring. So we will need to fill that role. And we have heard from the people who worked with him that it's a valuable role. So we are recommending that we continue that role. We are looking for just to do a 2-year, we're looking forward to a 2-year relationship. That's what we're thinking. If I might, I'm going to take you to the second page. See the language that we put in the Capitol bill every 2 years to fund him. And we had actually set it up so that we could either hire him, fill a position, or hire a consultant. So there was some flexibility in how we could bring on an IT review person. When we did this last time, we went through a process of interviewing people, and we ended up with Dan Smith, but we did involve key legislators in the final round of choosing him. So the key point I wanted to bring up here is, while we filled it as a consultant in the past, we've also had the opportunity to hire as a staff position. And so this isn't really a permanent position. This is a 2-year position. I don't know that it has to go through Jlmc, but I wanted to bring it to your attention to be aware that this was a consideration moving forward in ongoing discussions. Let me go back up to the first page where we talk more about it. And in the past, we've basically funded him at $125,000 a year. I think he's come in a little bit less than that in most of the year, in all the years, but I would recommend keeping it at that $250 for 2 years. And as I said before, in the past, this has actually come out of the capital projects, the IT projects that were funded in the Capitol bill. So we actually use those projects to help fund his position. the Capitol bill no longer has any IT projects in it. So we are thinking about moving to legislative carry forward or other resources moving forward to fund his work. Steve, do you have anything that you want to add to this?
Yeah, I would say that our priority is to find a consultant. And part of the thing is IT consultants or IT people are very expensive. And the cost has only gone up. I think when we got Dan, we've basically grown his salary by cost of living. And I think he's out of the market right now. So we think that the 250 is still going to be a good way to start with. It might be a little low, but I think that's our working thing. So our goal is really to fill this. It is a temporary position. Doesn't fit the statute, but as Catherine said, it's we just wanted you to be aware of it. It's also as you probably know, the amount of technology in our budget is growing. The sort of need has been estimated over the next few years, I don't know how many years, of over $1 billion. We're behind in this area. So I think it's really been a good move, but other people can talk about it. I think that a number of legislators have worked with them on this, even on this committee. So should we go to the second one, or do you want to just?
Do you want to talk about that one? Do you want to go to the second? Tell me what you would like to do.
Catherine, I'd like to stay on this for a moment.
Okay.
Questions answered about this one before we move on to the second one. I see Senator Kitchell.
Thank you. One of the things that has been desirable about Dan is it's sort of scalable, because there are times when you don't need the services. And so it allows you to, under the arrangement, has allowed to bring Dan in when we had a project, need his help, but not have an ongoing obligation. So that's the advantage of doing some kind of a contract, is you're only paying for the expertise for the projects and for the time you need it. So to me, that was one of the advantages we had of Dan, was that there was oftentimes when he was not working because there was no need. So to me, that scalability for the work was a positive aspect of going under the contract route.
Representative Leclerc.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to confess I'm new to this position, and I apologize if I'm going to ask some questions that maybe I should know the answers to. But first off, I didn't realize this position had been around for 6 years. I thought it was a little more recent than that. So a couple of the obvious questions I have to ask is, one, it's not so much about the person, but the position. Are we always in the position of, I guess, because you're going to be looking at IT projects primarily through the executive branch and judiciary, I would anticipate primarily. I know we went through and did some restructuring here a few years ago, especially on the executive side around this. Is the same level of, I guess, scrutiny required now that we've got an IT department?
So I'll throw this out and then turn it over to the legislators. I would say, the legislative role is that we're a separate branch, and I think that we have. I would just think it's been really critical. We've actually made changes to things that the executive department and judiciary have proposed, but maybe I should leave that to committee members to respond. I apologize for jumping in.
Well, I can speak to it. I was there from the get-go. It was in response to these very large projects. This isn't legislative IT at all. This is within the executive branch, and we were dealing with the failures of the DMV, the market of the exchange, et cetera. And we have now an oversight committee, and we were saying we're trying to find the funding. Or the funding is having to come from us, but we really don't have a good sense of the quality of the proposal, an understanding of why it's needed, et cetera. And we wanted to have an independent view, because these projects, I think the court, for example, I don't know how much money that was, $20–30 million. So they represent a significant amount of public expenditure, and the legislature really did not have any capacity to evaluate what was being proposed and the expenditures associated with them. So it was to give us some expertise or consultation to give assurances that the project was sound, it was necessary, the financing, the scope, et cetera, were well thought out. So it was really to give us that independent assessment to guide us in our decision-making on these very large projects that were being proposed by the various agencies and departments.
Do we have any examples of where he was able to point out areas that were deficient or make suggestions for improvements? And were there any cost savings associated with those? Do we know?
Probably the best thing to do, and we didn't bring him, but his reviews of projects we haven't really quantified the cost savings. What we have done is they've changed the management. I think we had tremendous meetings on the up until even this past year on the integrated eligibility project, and raised issues which have actually been incorporated in what they've done. It's changed how they present their proposed financing to the legislature. It's maybe the timing of projects, but it would be very hard to sort of find. I mean, he tends to try to work with the executive branch, not in a confrontative way. And so the goal is really not to be, challenging, but more to sort of work with them to make their project better. So it's been in that sense, I would just throw
the other, most recently, I'll give an example. We have struggled with the common chart of accounts with our school districts.
Right.
It is so long in doing. Martha Heath was chair of House Appropriations when that money was set aside. With last spring, all the school districts were complaining about the software that the Agency of Education had procured and whether it lacked certain functionality. As a legislator, and they were saying, don't move this project forward. And actually there was a bill to halt it. How do we determine the functionality or was it the lack of support? Was it training? Was it actually the software itself? How to address it? And if we were going to make an informed decision, which was sort of stop this and make it go away, was that the right decision to make? There had been a lot of money spent already. So that to me is a very recent example of where Dan went in and helped us. He talked to the superintendents and to try to get a better independent view of what was happening so that we would have information to make the best decision. So to me, that was an example where he helped advise us, really had the technological background and had the time to give both sides an opportunity to explain the situation, which otherwise we were just we were going to do something more ad hoc. So that I suppose you can, to quantify that's hard, but to have a common chart of accounts is very desirable from a fiscal perspective from the state level. And we're still struggling with it.
Thank you.
Any more follow-up, Representative Leclerc?
I'm good, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Turning back to the committee, any other questions or comments? Catherine and Steve, either of you have anything else you want to add before we move on to the next item?
I don't think so. Okay.
So Catherine, looking at the fiscal analyst position.
Sure, I will pull this up.
Thank you.
Can you see that? Okay. So this is a request for a new permanent position in the Joint Fiscal Office. We have had limited revenue staff in the past. It's been a point of discussion, and with the pandemic, we're finding ourselves vastly understaffed to meet the needs of the various committees. So we would request adding a full-time position to strengthen our capacity to meet demands in the revenue and related areas, including economic development. There's been a huge number of economic development proposals that have come through, and do not see much fiscal staffing or oversight until they land in a revenue committee, which puts it at so much of a disadvantage. We could have perhaps provided better input up front if we had more staff. We also have many fiscal notes, and there are many other legislative requests. So we are proposing to add a fiscal analyst that would serve those needs and assist on the revenue side. The estimated cost would not exceed $120,000. And we are proposing this very simple language to add one new permanent exempt position, fiscal analyst in the Joint Fiscal Office. Stop sharing. And I don't know if anybody else, if Steve, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, thanks. No, I'll just be available for questions. I guess the only thing I'd just say is the 120 is probably a high side estimate. Part of it is we don't know we figure the salary would be somewhere in the range of 70 to 75 or 80. And you don't know what their family size is and what the benefit package will end up being. But that just gives us, I would think it's going to be less than that, but I don't know what it'll be.
I saw Representative Ansel and then Senator Benning.
Right. I mean, I can certainly attest to the expanding need for this kind of resource. We get great support from Joint Fiscal Office, but I feel like we're running them
Join the meeting
much of the time. So I hope we're able to support this. I think it's really critically important when we get proposals from other committees. It's not their fault, but they generally haven't gone through the kind of vetting that you'd want to have happen. And then it sets up a weird dynamic between our committee and the originating committee. So I think it's really important.
Senator Benning, excuse me.
Keeping in mind that we are on YouTube with an audience that doesn't know the answer to the question, and some of us on this committee may not have had the courage to ask, what is a permanent exempt position?
So all legislative positions are exempt, meaning that they don't get any protection of the current collective bargaining. So this would be an exempt position means they're essentially subject to legislative personnel policies, which they serve at the pleasure of this one to serve at the pleasure of the Joint Fiscal Officer. But basically, if the legislature, this doesn't work out, there's no statutory protection. The fact that it's permanent, it just implies we have a limited service, which means could be 2 or 3 years. This one is basically giving us the authority to hire somebody permanently if we find somebody.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Senator Benning. Any other? Senator Kitchell.
I just want to build on what Representative Ansel said in terms of the volume of work that has, first of all, the staff work incredibly, and there are certain people that would say they need more staff, and you say, oh, well, just figure out how to do things a bit more efficiently. But the kind of analytical work and the time has grown a lot. And I feel that we have a longstanding experience that we expect a lot of joint fiscal staff. And I'm not saying it just because I'm chair of appropriations, but if they say they're calling uncle on the workload, I believe them. And I think that that's where we are at this point. And as was said, the money committees get bills from all over, and it's, well, as Pro Tem is now experiencing, you can see oftentimes the amount of work that still has to be undertaken between the money committee and the policy committee. And I would support this request. I don't know if it means a change in the budget proposal that you have, or whether you feel you can accommodate it within the budget as it currently exists.
Steve?
Yeah, I would just, I think that we looked at our budget, we could conceivably accommodate for FY 22 with carry forward, but it'd be touch and go. And I think we'd probably come to your committee, Senator Kitchell, and ask for some increase. And I think it probably, for that reason, I think it would be something this committee would have to approve.
Senator Mazza?
When you said 125,000, is that up to or what? Because I heard that maybe
Yeah.
75. I mean, you
I
hate to
think
advertise something at 125 if you can start with a lot less. I mean, if
Oh,
you
yeah.
put the ceiling there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'd advertised it as 70 to 75,000 or 70, $80,000 position. The reason it's the total cost there is not to exceed 120 is if somebody comes in with a family plan, that can be in the between 20 and 25,000 benefits plus retirement and vacation and sick leave and all the things that we pay for mean that
Right.
even if you only pay them 75 or her, you're going to be over 100 in total cost.
But the applicant is not aware, it does not expect a 125.
No, it wouldn't be advertised anywhere near, be advertised in 70 and 80 probably.
That's salary and benefits. Benefits are usually a third of the salary on top. So that's a rough formula.
So I was appreciative of Senator Benning reminding me this morning that because we were on YouTube, because we're on Zoom, that there might be questions that people have that are watching that may not be top of mind for us. And I'm wondering if either Catherine or Steve, you could just talk to the volume of work that's going to increase as we look to manage the ARPA funds that are coming to Vermont, just so that they also can have in context why there might be especially a need for an additional fiscal analyst right now.
Yeah, and maybe I'll start and then Catherine can jump in. The ARPA funds, as you know, we had CRF, which was about 1.25 billion. The ARPA money is between 1 and 1.4 billion that is coming in. We now are looking at an infrastructure bill and maybe a social services bill that between them will be at least that much or more. And so what's been happening is the staff has been skewed heavily on dealing with those types of issues, let alone that we have some major, this year it may be pension reform. There's been an issue of childcare coming up, and all of those raise issues of tax policy, because there are a lot of proposals to sort of deal with that. Plus, we're going to find out that, and just to give you the ARPA example, is on the one hand, we see a lot more federal money coming in, but one of the side effects of that federal money is it's really increasing the revenues in the general fund and the TIF and the education fund as that money gets spent in Vermont. And one of the things we have to think about is in the next year or two, we're going to be, once this money stops coming in at the level that it is, you're going to see the general fund and the education fund similarly decline in what their receipts are. And so what we have is we have the immediate need of what do we do with the money and how it's really stressing the staff to sort of solve those issues. And then you have the sort of longer term meeting of how do we restructure our revenue situation given these the sort of temporary euphoria that we're living in a sense of dollars. And it's just the complexity is pretty massive, and the need to sort of create a capacity to deal with that is also there, because the pressure will be back on revenues and control of spending pretty quickly. And I don't know, Catherine, do you want to jump in on that at all? Or?
No, I think that's true. I think it's true. And Steve was focusing on the revenue side because that's a request, but I think it's true on the spending side as well. Figuring out all of the fiscal aspects is, it's a blessing, I guess, for the state, but it's also a lot of work to spend it well and wisely.
Thank you. If there is no more discussion or no more questions, I would entertain a motion to approve the request for these positions for the Joint Fiscal Office.
So move.
I see Senator Mazza has moved. Any other discussion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell.
Madam Chair, is there a way to divide the question here? Because I'm totally supportive of the additional analyst. I'm still trying to understand more, and because I just heard about this yesterday, to be fair, and I'm not looking to hold this up, but if I have to vote right now, I'm going to probably be, I would not necessarily support this new position or this position until I understand more about it, but that's just me.
I understand, Representative Leclerc, and before we went live, one of the things that we talked about is the challenging nature of trying to do this work over Zoom and getting people the information they need in a timely manner. So I certainly understand. I'm going to ask Senator Kitchell.
Point of clarification. The fact is we've had this resource available to us under a contract. If the plan is to continue that arrangement, is there, and that's part of the existing budget and expenditure, do we actually have to make a decision? It's just simply that the person who's been doing the job is leaving, and the mechanism by which more informational about how we might proceed with work that has been done in this, under this arrangement for a number of years. So it's more of a question about, is there, are we, I cannot, if we were going to say, yes, we want to move to a permanent position, that I agree would require a decision, but I'm not, I just want to clarify, if we say, look, our first option is continue what we're doing, because it allows elasticity to the work flow, then do we need, if we say try that and it doesn't work, then come back and deal with it later when we can have more information? I guess it's what I'm asking.
So I'm going to ask Legislative Counsel Jennifer Carby to weigh in here. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning, Jennifer Carby, Legislative Counsel. So looking at the language of the statute and what Catherine, I think, reviewed with you at the beginning of her presentation, it is requests for new permanent positions for inclusion in the proposed legislative branch budget that requires Jlmc approval. I think the first part of their request was really to have either a contract or a, I think, limited service position, and actually look at that part of the language. So technically it doesn't need this committee's approval in the way that the new fiscal analyst position they're asking for does. I think they have brought it to you anyway, and so you may want to weigh in which case I think you could take the two positions up separately if you were so inclined. I don't think there's any reason you have to necessarily vote on them as a package.
Thank you. I saw Steve Klein's hand. Do you still
Yeah,
have?
I was just going to say what Jane said. The first one, Jen said, which is that the first one is really informational because it's a temporary position. It's only 2 years and it doesn't really fit the requirements of approval of the committee. So we're really coming to you with the fiscal analyst position for approval.
So I very much appreciate the question from Senator Kitchell, clarification from Jen Carby. Clearly, when I set up the agenda, that was a point of clarity that I didn't have. So we're really voting on the second position, which is the fiscal analyst position. And the other one is a continuation of a position that already exists that's within your budget at this point. So we need a new motion, which is a motion to approve the fiscal analyst position. I see Senator Mazza, seconded by Representative Korinsky. Any other discussion? And Jen Carby, I will ask, do we generally call the roll or do we call for a majority of the committee?
I think you can do it either way. I think, I don't know if Secretary Bloomer or Clerk Rask has a different take, but I don't think there's a requirement for you to do it either way.
Do we have a clerk?
We don't have a clerk. So I will say, all those in favor of approving the fiscal analyst position, primarily working in revenues and economic development, please raise your hand. I vote yes. So everyone present, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I do not see anyone opposed. Thank you. And certainly to follow up, Representative Leclerc, any additional information you or anyone else would like about the other position, certainly want to get that to you in a timely manner. And I do apologize for the last minute nature of the meeting. We were a little bit pressed for time because of the second item on the agenda. So I want to thank Steve Klein,
Thank you.
and Catherine,
Thank you all.
for coming to us this morning. The next item on the agenda deals with the issue of body cameras for the Capitol Police. So I want to just give a little bit of background here before we get into the discussion. So as background, as part of the FY 2021 budget that was passed by the General Assembly and assigned by the governor, it had funding for Capitol Police to purchase body cameras. The budget also called for the Sergeant of Arms to present a draft policy regarding the use of these cameras by Capitol Police. It was supposed to come to this committee, the Joint Legislative Management Committee, and for the committee to review and adopt a final body camera policy on or before April 1st, 2021. Before I turn it over to the chief, I just want to acknowledge that we started the session at a difficult time in our nation's history with the storming of the Capitol building in DC. And it happened the same week that we all started our session. And I mention it because this is a public meeting, and I just want to acknowledge the extent to which our Sergeant of Arms, that office, their staff, and the Chief of Police and his staff worked incredibly hard to make sure that we were all safe and secure here in our building. And I know that we really haven't had an opportunity to publicly thank you for that work, because we did start this session in the midst of this national conversation around safety and security. And I just wanted to take a moment here to acknowledge that and thank you for your service to all of us here that work in the building. And so while we continue to talk about any ongoing threats to us here in our Capitol building, and as we prepare any policy responses to keeping Vermonters safe as they come into our work in the People's House, we all take this really seriously, as making sure our building stays both open and safe for the people who work here. I just want to acknowledge that this conversation that we'll have in this committee is part of a broader conversation that we're having nationally around what effective policing looks like, what does effective public policy look like in relationship to the work that we do in conjunction with our Capitol Police. And I know that the first part of the discussion that the chief would like to have is about the issue of body cameras. The second related to a possible request for tasers. And I'm realizing now, before I turn it over to the chief, and I apologize, Representative Ansel did have an announcement that she wanted to make. So you want to wait on that, Representative?
No, I don't know what you're talking. I don't know what you're talking about. So
Okay, all right. It was a misunderstanding.
not waiting. I don't know what it is.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Ansel. Janet?
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. Janet Miller, Sergeant at Arms. I think it was the other Janet.
It was the other Janet. I apologize. No wonder I didn't make it. My note. It was not Janet Ansel. Janet Miller had an announcement she wanted to make. Thank you. My apologies, Representative Ansel.
And I've been really working on a lot of ways and means legislation too lately. Sometimes people get our emails mixed up, but thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank you for the kind words that you had. And Chief Romey, we've talked over this body camera policy together, but of course, him with the police policies and the use of force is his lane. But I just did want to make something clear to the committee. And after the legislature had passed legislation for the budget and what you just spoke of, we submitted our report to you on January 14th. However, after the budget went through, just so that the committee knows, in October of the last year, the other policy came into place, and the information now has the body camera policy going for the policy established by the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, and not necessarily it's just, not what you may say. So there's a conflict of the statutes a little bit. And Chief Romeo is going to explain that to you in the power presentation. So
Thank you, Janet. Sorry for the misunderstanding.
no problem.
Okay. Chief Romeo.
Good morning. Let's see, make sure I'm all off mute here. Matthew Romiak, Chief of Police for the Capitol Police, and would like to echo Janet's appreciation for your kind words and support. I mentioned something in January to her that for the first, I think in a 20-year career, it felt like I had the most support of any time in that 20-year law enforcement career as we were trying to navigate the issues that were surrounding us. And I just want to make sure that things get pulled up right. I don't think you're seeing the right screen.
We are
I
seeing.
apologize. Let's see.
We were seeing a
You ever have that?
on body cameras.
You ever have that feeling where, half the tabs you have open are frozen? You don't know where the music is coming from. Okay, so body camera policy overview. Janet mentioned to you that this language was in the budget under Section E128, and the Sergeant at Arms did provide that draft policy to the committee on the 14th. Subsequent to that, in Act 166, there is now a statewide body camera policy mandate. And on February the 22nd of this year, the Law Enforcement Advisory Board adopted a new statewide body camera policy to supplant the 2016 policy. That policy now sits at the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, and we expect another body camera policy to be pushed out prior to January 1st of 2022. The policy that Mike sent the committee a couple of days ago is substantially similar to the policy that Janet submitted to the committee in January. So I'm trying to keep all of these different drafts together, but they are substantially similar. And what I'd like to do is walk through kind of the policy, at least the highlights of it. And where I have things that are highlighted are things that are different from the published Law Enforcement Advisory Board model policy.
This is Jane Kitchell. I'm just trying to keep things straight. The last language becomes effective 2022, and it applies to all law enforcement. There's pre-existing language. I guess maybe this is a question for Jen. That the Capitol Police, before they can have body cameras, have to have a policy. Would the language about uniform across all law enforcement effective 2022 supersede that earlier language? Jen?
Well, it's a little confusing. I think they don't line up.
Or do we, or in fact, do we need to go in and clarify? Because one language is in the budget. That's why I was asking. So I guess at some point we need to reconcile or clarify exactly how we proceed relative to these two pieces of legislation.
Yes, I don't think there's currently a conflict because I don't think you have authorized, under the budget language, I don't think you have authorized the Capitol Police to use body cameras, so they don't fall under the statute yet. But I think as soon as you do, they fall under the statute, and then there's that tension or that potential conflict between the provisions. So I think it would be a good idea to figure out where you want Capitol Police to end up, and then we can craft some language to reflect that.
Harmonize, as they would say.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
So understanding that we really don't know what the final policy might look like that comes out in 2022, the way I have basically worked in my career is that you can add 2 policies or mandatory minimums, but taking away from them or changing them can be difficult. So anything that you see that's highlighted is something that's different from that model policy. And we cover the same objectives of body-worn camera usage. We cover most of the same procedures. In the model policy, it directs that body-worn cameras are issued to uniformed personnel. Of course, all of our personnel are uniformed. And then we outline a couple specific exemptions. And the language in the actual policy allows for the chief of police, or in the model policy allows for the chief of police or designee to make exemptions to the mandatory usage of them. And so we outlined a couple of specific exemptions when an officer's off in training. Even if they're in uniform, they may not, that would not be a place where we may want them carrying them. If we're in a dress uniform for some ceremony or event, things like that. The next big, I guess, shift is the substitutes the legislative retention laws and policies for retention laws and policies produced by the state archivist. I understand, although I'm not fully knowledgeable about it, but there tends to be some conflicts between state archival policies and legislative archival rules, and that is one of the biggest, I guess you could say, shifts in this policy, is that it would direct us to follow the legislative branch record retention rules. In permitted and prohibited usages, there is a line in the model policy that calls for the activation of a body-worn camera on any calls for service. And we specified that it would be a call for law enforcement service, not just a, hey, Kurt, can you run this up to House Appropriations? Where a call for service in the traditional law enforcement agency, that might be a call for service. We specifically included it as a call for law enforcement service. Also note that there's an exception to body-worn camera usage specifically for lawful picketing or First Amendment demonstrations. There's some specific language in there that was in the 2016, it's in the 2021 model policy. I expect it to survive the Criminal Justice Council program, where we don't just automatically activate a body camera in a demonstration or a First Amendment event, only when it rises to the level of criminal conduct or if there's a specific reason for doing it. There's also a line that's added to the model policy in our draft policy about a pre-incident buffer. And a buffer in this, if you have the time to click around YouTube and watch body-worn camera footage, there's plenty of it out there. And basically, about the first, it depends on how you set it, but prior to the actual activation, it's always recording, and then when the officer activates this or some other trigger is activated, then it will go back and grab that video prior to. And it's designed so that an officer is not necessarily focusing on activating the body camera, but focusing on doing their job and understanding that they can get the information they need to prior to their activation. This section in the model policy is deleted and substituted by the next slide. And again, this is one that only if it has a record retention schedule approved by the state archivist or is authorized by law. We've taken that out and added this, and this is where I will tell you that I didn't make this up. I tactically acquired it from existing policies at other agencies, and it basically sets a record retention schedule. And I believe this is, don't hold me to this, but I believe this is one that the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns has weighed in on, that this is a good record retention schedule for body-worn camera footage. I believe this has also been through the state archivist's office by another agency. Again, don't hold me to that, but this section also permits the Sergeant at Arms, myself, and with the advice of Legislative Counsel, it allows us to update this section without requiring a full review by the committee, basically to meet best practices and to meet our retention guidelines. This is a section on the redaction. We have to follow Open Records rules just like anybody else, and how we deal with things when we deny Open Records requests. And then this highlighted line is added in there, and that we can redact body camera footage in accordance with Vermont law, and we shorten it to include only the event inquired about. And that's basically to make sure that we don't unnecessarily include footage that may be run in advance, that pre-incident buffer, to make sure that we provide what is demanded by the Public Records Act and requested by that person requesting footage, but so that they don't get inappropriate footage or footage that does not apply to what they're asking about.
I have a question.
Senator Kitchell?
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure I fully understand this. You were talking about so they don't get pre-buffer, but I'm thinking of an incident where someone was shot, and it was that period of time before they activated the camera. And so there are times when you say it wouldn't cover the pre-buffer. Am I connecting two things erroneously? In other words, would there be time, in fact, that before the camera actually got activated officially, that there might be information that is critical to the incident? And are you suggesting that wouldn't be available?
Oh, absolutely. I think that would absolutely be available. What I'm getting at is just for instance, and we haven't really nailed down what buffer we want to use. I think we're going to see that a little bit of a learn as we go. There's some standards on both ends of the equation, if you will. But I guess what I'm getting at is, let's say we have a 30-minute buffer, for instance, and an officer activates a camera because of some incident that happens, and 5 minutes prior to him activating that is relevant to that event. And the other 25 minutes are just him standing there or sitting in the office or having those random conversations we have all day. That would not be relevant to the incident. We would not. We're looking to release everything relevant to an incident, but nothing that's not, if you will.
Okay.
So this is a note about personnel performance and use of body-worn camera footage. This is not in the model body camera policy, but we looked at including it in ours, and it's how we use body-worn camera footage for training, for officer improvement, for personnel management, and it's a protection for the officers that we're not going to go in and audit body-worn camera footage on a witch hunt, if you will. We're not going to look at these things we're going to look at these things to help officers improve their performance, to encourage improvement on their own, and we're going to use them as a training thing, but we're not going to go through and use these unnecessarily as a disciplinary hammer, if you will. It also acknowledges that, these are mechanical devices. They're subject to failure. Failure of equipment is something that happens, and unless we see a situation where an officer is repeatedly or maliciously not activating their body-worn camera, we understand that things fail, but we're also not going to have an officer that refuses to use it. And this line highlighted in green is the only thing that was not in what we sent out to you prior to this meeting. And part of it is as we're watching the development of law and case law and policy surrounding specifically a major incident investigation. For instance, an officer that's involved in the deadly force situation, an officer that's involved in criminal investigation of any kind, that they don't that we're making sure that we align with the statewide approach that they are not allowed to watch their body camera footage in those situations. They would be allowed, of course, to use their body camera footage to assist in writing their reports, documenting evidence, taking witness statements, all the things that are appropriate and found in our policy. But if they're ever suspected of criminal conduct, serious misconduct, those Category A violations, or if they're subject of criminal investigation, then that is they are restricted from watching that footage in accordance with how those investigations get run. And then the last thing is that exemption from disclosure under the Public Records Act. It's a line at the very end that says all the exemptions under the Public Records Act are contained in 1 VSA 317. And that's the highlights of our body-worn camera policy.
Thank you, Chief. Questions, comments, clarifications? Senator Benning.
Chief, you went by these pretty quickly, and all of us trying to digest it means I may have questions that pop into my head a little bit later than your actual screenshot. But if a civil lawsuit was being brought in a court-ordered review, I'm assuming that the for cause policy would be met at that point. Am I correct?
I believe so. I would defer to the attorneys in the room, but certainly in a judicial review or a discovery item, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I defer to the attorneys, but I think Public Records Act ends when discovery begins, is my understanding.
Okay.
Senator Kitchell?
Excuse me, I'm eating my bagel as I'm meeting this morning. I wanted to just ask about the slides where you wouldn't be subject to disciplinary action. It would be more for teaching, et cetera. The very fact that there's a camera recording changes the whole dynamic of how you would say in the absence of that recording. And there could be times when, in fact, what is recorded just by review reveals action or behavior that does require disciplinary action. Are we creating a safe haven for not taking supervisory action or disciplinary action that it has been discovered simply because there has been a recording of the event? I was real concerned. And is that a standard that is applied elsewhere in law enforcement?
Well, Senator, I would, I'm just going to bring the screen back up real quick so we can, I guess this is the important line. The existence of the recording does not exacerbate or aggravate the conduct. It only presents an account of it. Nothing prevents us from taking action based on a recording. And I think what's important to understand here is this is where this is a place where multiple policies come together to function. We have an internal affairs policy as required by statute. We have a use of force policy, which is, I think we're on our third or fourth revision in the last year due to case law and statutory law coming out. We're due for another change when the statewide policy is pushed out and adopted. This is just one cog in the wheel, and basically the point of that paragraph is that, you know, we're not going to over discipline just because we have camera footage of it. Officers are still going to be subjected to the same standard they would be. I think part of this, and you know, another policy that this goes into is our early intervention program, our early intervention policy. We do want to help officers develop and grow and learn and train in advance of these things. And if we can facilitate that through through body-worn camera reviews and training and after-action reviews, then that's definitely what we want to do.
So my second part of that question was, is that standard for all law enforcement? Is that provision, or is that something that you drafted specific to the Capitol Police?
It's definitely not specific to us. I acquired it from another policy in a, you know, and again, we tried to look at all the policies that we can get our hands on and pull the best out of what we can.
Okay, thank you.
So I have been made aware of the time by a couple of people on this call. I know people have obligations at 9. I want to ask our legislative counsel, Jennifer Carby. I understand the policy was supposed to be voted on by this committee by tomorrow. And I'm also feeling that there are members of this committee that really would like to have some more time to reflect on this. So what are our options at this point? And I will own that it was an oversight of my office in not getting this disseminated quickly.
Well, we could vote to give ourselves an extension.
You can, I mean, so the language, sorry.
No, go ahead. You know, one thing I would like, and I know Jen has probably reviewed it. Certainly our Judiciary Committee, Senator Benning knows that this is, I would really like to have an opportunity for the policy committees to just look at it and because I don't feel that, you know, this is an area that I necessarily have a lot of, but I know that that's been an important area, and I would feel much more comfortable if we had a chance, at least, I don't know, Joe, you can weigh in differently, but for the policy committees to have a briefing on this as well before we say, yeah, that's the right thing to do.
Before we do that, Senator Benning, I would love to just hear from Jennifer Carby, just to make sure that I'm clear on options that we have.
Just so you know, Beck, I have to leave.
Yes, I know, Joe.
But I agree with Jane. The committees of jurisdiction ought to take a look. We ought to have 30 days. That's all I needed to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Jen.
So the language of from the budget bill technically gives you 2 days. You have until April 1st. That doesn't solve your problem. You know, I think you can. I think you should give guidance to the Capitol Police about what you want them to do with respect to the use of body cameras, because the language does say they shall not use the cameras until this committee reviews and adopts the final policy on or before April 1st. So if you are not ready to review and adopt, you should give them guidance about what should be in place until you have adopted a final policy and perhaps your expectation for a timeline.
So Senator Kitchell has asked that we take some more time and have committees of jurisdiction weigh in on the policy before we make a decision. Thoughts?
And I think the spirit of that is we don't implement or use them until we're all comfortable that the right policies. So I think inherent in the extension is the intent that we not employ them until that's done.
I would second that.
Senator Mazza agrees. Chief, I think I saw your hand.
I was just going to note that we haven't signed a contract or anything for them, so we don't have them, you know, yet. So I would just note that, you know, I wonder if the committee is boxed in a little bit based on the statute that there's a statewide policy, but I don't know, you know.
We cannot
this is definitely
withstand.
out of my lane.
Right. They write the statute so they can change the statutes.
Yep. So I'm going to propose that we shelve this for. I want it to move forward with alacrity. So I'm thinking 2 weeks, so that this doesn't continue to drag on as we get into the hecticness of the end of the session. So that's my proposal. Would entertain any other questions, comments on that proposal for us to take 2 weeks and then reconvene. Representative Kowinski.
And Senator Ballin, I think that this makes sense. I don't want to rush it, so I appreciate that. And I'm happy to work with Representative Grad on getting this on the agenda quickly in House Judiciary.
And so we won't be taking a vote on Jane's suggestion. It's not a formal motion unless somebody would like to propose a formal motion to reconvene in 2 weeks.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you, Chief Romei. Thank you, Janet. We will set a date for 2 weeks from today, and I will follow up with the speaker about having Representative Grad take this up, and I will also check in with Senator Sears in my chamber. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.